Welcome to the second season of Operational Harmony, balancing business and mental well-being, where we achieve goals without sacrificing peace. Our host, Nikki, is the owner and founder of Nikki's Office, where she specializes in social media management, business audits, and business coaching. Her journey through mental health and entrepreneurship not only brings awareness, but also equips her with valuable coping skills. This unique experience offers a fresh perspective on approaching challenges and innovating in different ways. Let's introduce our guest.
Hi, I'm Mark Steven Porro, the author of A Cup of Tea on the Commode. At 55, I gave up my carefree bachelor life to become a first-time parent to a 90-year-old, sharp-tongued, guilt-tripping, stubborn as all get out, and yet funny lady who could barely remember my name, my mother. It's rare for a son to take on 24/7 caregiving, but I jumped in with gusto to fill my mom's last years with love, laughter, and joy. Not always successful, but I came pretty damn close. And so A Cup of Tea in the Commode chronicles my 3.5-year adventures with my mom. And I guess the main purpose of the book is to inspire others to find the joy in caregiving. I did it, and I think I'm a better man for it.
Okay. I have done caregiving for my mother in the past, and I know that is definitely not an easy task to do. So,
Yeah, as I found out from many people, but yeah, emotionally, mentally, emotionally, and physically, it can be exhausting. Since I didn't have children or so, I had to learn a lot about unconditional love. And I had a good relationship with my mother, but in her later years, I called her an Archie Bunker type. She became a real curmudgeon and not that much fun to be around. But normally she was a pretty funny lady. My dad was funny too. So humor played a big role in my upbringing. And whenever there was any kind of a crisis or stress, usually humor was the first thing that we pointed to. And I think my mom I never heard her complain about pain or anything like that. So she was a tough woman. And my dad also, they were from the Depression era and they kept their emotions to themselves and things like that. And so I think we picked up on some of that. But yeah, it was a great learning experience for me. But I went in, I did ask for permission. I didn't jump in right away with the 24/7. She had a crisis in February of 2011 where she was not happy. I was in California living in LA at the time, and my brother called and said, Mom just shut down. And the doctor cut off all meds and the food, and we called hospice. And she was living in the house we all grew up in, but we had a family living upstairs who were overseeing household duties and doing the shopping and laundry. She needed some help, but she could still walk and function for the most part. But then as her personal hygiene abilities declined, we had to have someone come in and get her ready for bed at night and clean her up in the morning. And she usually went out to a senior center for some activities. But I think as time went on, there was a lot of tension between the people who were living in there, and Mom kept it pretty quiet from us, but I could feel it when I would visit. And I think that she just kind of looked around and said, if this is going to be my last years of my life, I'm done. I'm out of here. And so she just actually, I think, willed herself to die. And so when hospice came in, my brother called me and our other siblings, there were 6 of us. We all flew in we were basically on death watch. And we had a priest come in and deliver the last rites. Mom's laying in bed. She opened her eyes very rarely, but she didn't speak. And she did respond to touch, which was nice. So I think she sensed that we were there. And one of us always stayed in the bedroom with her, just in case. And a few weeks later, before that, the younger sister and I hung out with hospice because we wanted to learn how to take care of our mother, because we wanted to do as much of that as possible for as long as Mom wanted to be here. So we learned a lot of the tips and tricks, how to change bedding with the helpless patient at bed, doing the diapers, attending to any medical needs. At that point, she had some bed sores. And so that gave us a lot of comfort to care for her and learn. That's where I actually started learning the proper way to do things. And I think Mom sensed that love was back in the house. And a few weeks later, she snapped out of it. And then I started looking around. This house was no longer the beautiful, welcoming home that I grew up in. And I thought my mom deserved better, and I needed to do some work to improve the environment. And I stayed with her for a few months, and I know that she liked it. She responded very positive to that. But I had to go back to LA at some point. I did have a business there. I was an actor for many years, but I was in my mid 50s, so I was aging out of that. Things were slowing up. But hospice was going to be on duty, at least in New Jersey. When they're called, they stay on for 6 months unless the patient expires before that. And so I went back to LA, and then I came back in September for a few weeks and took care of her again and took her to her grandson's wedding at the Jersey Shore. And I had a great time getting her all dolled up and ready for that. That was her first outing in 7 months. And she had a great time. And it was during that trip where I asked her if she wanted me to come back to make sure she was cared for this way all the time. And she said yes. And we had a funny conversation. I said, first of all, we're going to have fun if I do this. Second of all, do you trust me? She said, yes. I said, you understand I will do my best to keep you healthy and happy for the rest of your life. And she said, yes. And I said, that means I'm in charge now and you must obey me. And her mood completely changed. But she puckered up for a kiss. Now, I called her a kissing bandit. She loved the kisses. And I wasn't sure if that was a sign of surrender or one wishing me luck. And so I gave her a kiss and hoped for the best. Because she could be a tough cookie, originally a New Yorker, and then for the last 50 or so years, a Jersey girl.
Neither one of those states produces people who are sunshine and roses.
Oh, they hide it behind a very brash facade.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So how long did you care for your mom?
I say our adventures lasted 3.5 years. So not all of that was the full-time care, but this whole thing started in February of 2011. And I don't want to ruin the ending of the book, but she left us in August of 2014. So a little over 10 years now.
Yeah. I'm sorry that you lost her, but it sounds like you got some great living advice from the experience.
Oh, it was fabulous. I don't regret any of it. And if I had to say, my mother left this world in a way that would be the envy of others. Both of my folks did, actually. My dad died 14 years earlier, and he died in his bed with me by his side and my older sister. And my mother died in her bed, very little pain. And I was with her. And then my younger sister was with me when mom passed. And that was the way to go. It was a lovely time. I learned a lot. It gave me such a kick to care for my mother and make her feel good. And my brothers and sisters were great. They were very supportive and they let me take over. I'm the tallest kid, so maybe that had something to do with it, but we all trusted each other. And so I was the hands-on guy and they yielded to me if I needed to do something, but if I needed help, they would be there to support. And so that was great. And my mother loved that as well.
Can you share some of the lessons that you learned?
I'd say the main one was unconditional love. Again, I was never married, had no kids. So my unconditional love was my love for animals growing up. And not being married and all that stuff, some people would say I had a commitment issue, which I'm not so sure. But with this particular challenge, there was going to be no commitment issue. I said, I'm going to do this and I will stay here as long as mom wanted to stay here. And no matter how hard it got, of course, there's some stressful moments and some unpleasant moments. But yeah, once you make that decision, it was easy to hang in there and say, this is my job. Plus, I had to not disappoint my siblings or my mother or the spirit of my dad. There was enough pressure, self-induced pressure, but there was pressure on me to do a good job and finish it. I would also say then also empathy is something I learned. And also that comes from my acting training and also my design training. I have a design degree from the Ohio State University. And you really have to take into consideration your patient, your loved one, or in the design business, your client, the end user of whatever product you're designing. And so you have to put yourself in their shoes. And in this case, she's still my mother. She still deserves respect and love, but she's going to be a little slower than she has been. She may not be with it. My mother did have some bit of dementia where she saw people outside the window that weren't there or on the ceiling, or we had discussions about the things that never happened. and you got to kind of roll with the punches and say this. Oh, and also early on, this is a few months after taking over the 24/7. So I'm doing everything. There was no line I didn't cross, but all in the benefit of my mother's care. And so I wiped her butt several times a day. And out of her 6 kids, I'm the only one she couldn't remember my name. And I thought she was kidding at first. She had a wicked sense of humor. And one morning I went in, I brought her juice in the morning, and she said, "Now, what is it I call you?" And I said, "You're kidding, right?" And she says, "No." I said, "Name your kids." She said, "Laurel, Michael, Carol, David, DC." And she was stumped. So I said, "Mark." And she says, "Oh, Mark. Mark with a K?" I said, "Yes, you named me. I'm your favorite son." And she says, "I don't have favorites." And under my breath, I said, "You have a favorite to forget." So instead of taking that personally, I made a visual aid for her. I put my name in big block letters and I taped it to the ceiling. So when I would come in the morning, she'd be laying in bed. So normally I'd say, "Good morning." And she said, "Good morning." And then her eyes would shoot to the ceiling for the visual aid. And she would come back very proudly and go, "Mark." So after a few weeks, she didn't need that anymore. But again, that's where the humor came in. And you can't take things like that personally because that's just part of our getting older.
What's the name of your book again?
It's called A Cup of Tea on the Commode. And that came from just practicality. My mother's favorite drink was hot tea, skim milk, no sugar. And sometimes we had a commode bedside because she couldn't walk anymore after this incident. And sometimes Mother Nature took a little longer than was comfortable for either one of us on the commode. As a joke, I just said, "Hey, you want a cup of tea while we're waiting?" And she said, "Sure." And it became a hit. And then part of our morning ritual. So A Cup of Tea on the Commode was I thought, a fun title and catchy and also very practical.
How did you get to the south of France,
How did I get to
where you are now, France?
south of France? I came here, an ex-girlfriend of mine always wanted to retire in France, and that kind of put the bug in my ear. We visited where I live now in 2015, in April of 2015, and we were no longer a couple at that point, but we're still friends. I was still living in New Jersey, and she was living in LA. And we visited this little village, and it's just a cool little village, about 8,500 people. We have the cobblestone streets. My apartment that I bought is about 500 years old. They say Moliere was born here, not the playwright, but the character of the playwright. Moliere, he came down from Paris and wrote some of his big plays here. And so it's a very theatrical place, but they have their Hollywood Walk of Fame. They have a lot of artists of all kinds, musicians, ceramicists. I have a blacksmith who's a neighbor of mine who does some beautiful sculpture and metal and stuff like that. And so I felt very comfortable when I first came here. I came here for 5 days and saw this place and said, "I'm going to live here." And I put an offer in, and about a year and a half later, I moved. And I never expected to move to France, but we have French ancestors on my mother's side. And I think they had something to do with it because I never learned the language. The people here have been so friendly. I'm getting better with the language, but still, it's very difficult. And as we get older, it's really difficult. But they're just lovely. They keep apologizing for the bad English. And it's also in the middle of the largest wine growing region in the world, which is, if you're into wine, great. If you're not, it's a frickin' nightmare. I happen to be into the wine, so it's good. And the wine is literally cheaper than water here. It's amazing and it's excellent. And again, the people are passionate. That's their main thing. Of course, the cheese and the bread and the croissants and all that stuff. But boy, the wine, you could stop off at a little domain and it may be a husband and wife that run that thing. And they will stop and they'll sit and talk to you and have you sample their wine for a full afternoon. It's just lovely people. And they've got the way of life correct, where they enjoy each other. They have a 2-hour lunch every day, which is great for the families because the kids come home for lunch from school and that's their big meal. And if you're in the stores, things shut down from 12 to 2. And once you get used to that, it's a little inconvenient when you first get there. But boy, once you get used to that, it's lovely. And Sundays are very quiet. Everything shuts down, I think, around 12:30. If there's not that many stores open. Normally the stores are closed at 7:30 anyway. So there's no 24/7 stuff here. And it's just lovely. It really is. I call it my own little blue zone where everybody, they have a good social life and they eat well. And yeah, life is good.
That sounds excellent. Except I tried to learn French when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't go so well at all. I don't remember most of it. I can do like this.
They say we have 40,000 words in common. And there's a lot of words that we use that are the same thing, like anything with an ION, question, convention, situation, all those things are the same. Of course, they say it. I think it's a little better. Their accents are a little nicer.
Yeah.
But there's other things like on my book, Commode is not a portable toilet here. A commode is a chest of drawers.
Yeah.
So when they hear the title of my book, they go, and why not? But not like it's unique at all. They're going, sure, we put tea on the commode all the time. No big deal. But that'll take some time. My girlfriend's fluent. She's Swiss. So Swiss, they either are fluent in at least one of German, Italian, or French. So luckily she grew up on the French side of Switzerland and she helps. But I usually know I'm in trouble when she speaks only French. So I learned when I'm in trouble in French. Good to know.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to say before we switch over and do the mental health?
Yeah, go with the mental health because there are some issues with my mother with that as well. And we can talk about how I dealt with it or tried to deal with it because I had played a doctor on TV, so I knew some things.
That's a question for you. What shows were you in? If you were
I did my big run, I guess, was in the 80s and early 90s. I did a lot of television. I went out there and I wanted to be a good actor. So I started studying from day one. I did have a connection with an agent because I did some modeling and some commercials in the Midwest before I moved out there. And my agent said, so here's a good acting coach, start studying with him. So I started studying with him for day one. And my goal was to get on a quality show. Hill Street Blues was my main target, which was one of the top shows at the time. And less than 2 years later, I was on Hill Street Blues. So that was quite good. So that was like my first major credit. And once you get that one, then people respect you a little more because they say if they hired you and you worked on that show, you must be pretty good. So that opened some doors for me. I did Dynasty, Webster, It's a Living, a bunch of TV shows. I played a big drug lord on the Walker, Texas Ranger. I'll have to ruin the ending. I do get killed at the end. But that was a fun role because they ship you down to Dallas, Texas, and they treat you like a king. It was lovely.
Until you died.
Yeah, but even after, they feed you. Once they get to wipe up the blood, they feed you. That's really fun. When you're a union actor, they treat you really well when you have the work. The problem is there's not that much work, or certainly not steady work. And I still did a bunch of design on the side. So I've never waited tables other than playing a waiter on TV, which pays much better. So I was fortunate in that way. But the biggest role I did, at least money wise, was I was in Castaway with Tom Hanks, directed by Robert Zemeckis. And I replaced the original navigator. So in the crash scene, this guy, Jay, who I knew actually, but he had to leave. He had a commitment for a TV series up in Canada. So they had to replace him. They had to get a guy that looked kind of like him. And so I auditioned for it and I passed the first test. I looked enough like him. My hair wasn't gray at the time or salt and pepper like it is now. But after I passed the first round, the producer took me outside and said, listen, you're going to be in the crash scene. So you're going to be on what we call a gimbal, which is like a roller coaster for 3 days. You're going to be going like this. Can you handle it? And I said, I dated a French girl for 7 months. I can handle anything. And he burst out laughing and I knew I got the part. And then I called my ex-girlfriend who was French and said, thank you. And that thing still pays me. We shot that in 1999. And I still get some from Hill Street Blues too, which was in 86. But I get residuals are just a lovely gift. But Castaway was just crazy because at that point I was doing a lot of, let's say, bigger roles on television and some independent films. But my agent called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in working with these up and comer guys, so Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks?" And it was produced by that other little guy, Steven Spielberg. So I said, "Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that." So once I got that, it's such a difference when you're at a big budget because you get paid very well, not as well as Tom, because as soon as I got that role, I'm in the makeup trailer and one seat away is Tom making 20 million and I'm making a couple thousand. So it's really straight, but he was as nice as it can be. All of them were nice. Spielberg, it was a lovely guy, and Robert Zemeckis is lovely. So it was a really fun experience. And then after I did that and started seeing the paychecks rolling, I called my agent, said, any small part in a big movie, anything. But that ended up, I think, being my last big role. I think the last role, I did a film that was primarily Indian produced and cast, East Indian, but they shot a good part of it in LA. So I got cast as the, I think, district attorney of LA, and it was hot as can be, but I think that was my last role. And it was a lot of fun, but I got cut out of the film. I'm in the credits, but I'm not on the camera. So I got no residuals. And that movie had the biggest star in the world, was an Indian actor. Any star in India has got 1 billion fans. So this guy was the biggest guy in the world at the time. So that movie may have made really good money. And I didn't make it. I got paid for the time I was there, but I didn't get any residuals from that. So that was a shame.
You've been on some stuff that I've seen. I kept saying your face was familiar, but
if you Google my name or a cup of tea, you'll see some of the Hollywood stuff. It was funny because I sometimes rent my room. I have a guest room here, and I sometimes rent it because this is a big tourist town for in the summer months. And there was a very unfriendly lady from Spain. Most of the people are lovely, but this lady, her husband was great. He was a Scottish guy. And she just sat, and as soon as she came in and said, okay, in Spanish. And so he had to translate for me. Where's the dishwasher? Where's this? What time is breakfast served? And things like, and I'd say, the washing machine's there. Here are the instructions. I don't serve breakfast. You go out and you get a croissant and a cup of coffee like the rest of the people. And I don't do this. And she was just really nasty. I said, oh my gosh, I have my first princess in my town. A couple of days later, we're at this, it was a Saturday, and we have a huge, very famous market day. So the main street is just filled with all kinds of vendors and stuff. And I hear behind me, Mark, and I turn around, and it's this woman who's now smiling from ear to ear. And I'm like, what is up with that? And she goes, I knew you from somewhere. I need to have a picture with you. So I have no idea how she recognized me, but she recognized me from something.
Yeah, my brain kept at both times we've talked now. So when we did the meeting to set this up,
yeah,
the whole time I was sitting there, I think I recognize his face.
I don't know. You may from something. I also look like a lot of people. But that's why I moved here, to get away from all that celebrity stuff.
Yeah,
Had to escape.
I'm not one of those people who's going to start stalking you now.
And every time I go to the grocery store, because I use my American credit card, I have to sign. So I always say, oh, you want my autograph? And they're like, oh, sure, whatever. Just sign the thing. Pay for your groceries and get out of here. So they have no idea what I'm talking about.
Okay, so we're going to switch over to do the mental health side. And I wanted to go over ways to support things. Sorry, I'm not. So I wanted to go over balancing caregiving with having other things. So you want your life. And so it's balancing caregiving in life while there is that stuff going on. Because for a lot of people, they can get bogged down into I have to do this, I have to do that. I can't do this with this person because I have to do this here. I can't ever leave the house because I have to be right here. And there are ways to find balance. There are things you can do. And I felt that maybe you would be able to talk more about some of those ways because of what you went through with your mom. My mom was not the best mom, but she was an actual pain in the neck who would call you into her room every 5 seconds for absolutely no reason. So getting anything done and setting up any kind of boundaries wasn't possible with her. until she went to visit my sisters and came back going, nobody would help me there. You are so much more helpful. And I went, oh, wait a minute. That means I am doing way too much, and I can probably step back and let you do some of this stuff yourself. Because if you survived the 3 weeks you were in Maryland without all the crap I did for you and nobody else doing them, then that means
Yeah.
you don't really need those things. So that was my wake up call that kind of went, yeah, this isn't healthy. You can step back. And some people maybe don't have that switch flipped in their head because not everybody gets that stark contrast of, oh, she went to visit somebody. And when she comes back, it was, oh, you're the best at doing this. Wait, what?
Yeah.
um, so what are some of the things you did to not get too drawn in? I know that you have to take care of the person. That's
Right.
not what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying don't care for the person. I'm saying, how did you step back from things happening in order to preserve the happy way you wanted to help your mom leave, if that makes sense?
Yeah, the balancing is not easy. I was pretty lucky, but I would have to put her in her place. That was why I had that little discussion when we started. I said, I will now be in charge because your life is in my hands. And at this point, I know better. And so there'd be a few times where she did things and I said, you got to stop. She had beautiful long nails. She was a nail model in her late teens and early 20s. And these things were lethal weapons at this point because she was scratching like crazy and drawing blood. I had to trim those things, but boy, that was like giving up the crown jewels. I had to do a little bit at a time, but I had to be firm about it but again, we worked out a compromise. I said, okay, I'm just take a little bit off this day. And slowly but surely, I got them down to, I guess, non-lethal length. But sometimes I had to be stern. There were a couple of moments that I'm not proud of, but again, she was like a stubborn little kid. I did all the cooking and cleaning and all the chores and all that business and taking care of all personal hygiene and all that business. And sometimes you don't get any appreciation. And so I cooked her dinner one night, and I always cooked really nice, healthy meals, and she refused to eat it. And she couldn't tell me why. She just shut down. That was part of her, I guess, depression rearing its ugly head. And so I said, listen, I do all this stuff for you. And I went down the list of all the things. And I said, you have to show some appreciation. I need you to keep up your strength. For your health, you need to keep up your strength. You need to eat that meal. And she refused. And so I flicked off the light in anger. And then I went down to the basement to take out my frustration on the innocent load of laundry. And so after I jammed the laundry in and turned it on, slammed the lid down, I went back upstairs for round two. And I flicked the lights on, and my mother's sitting there she was in a wheelchair at this point, and she's sitting at the table. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her plate is clean, and the utensils are placed neatly on the plate. And she ate in the dark. And it just killed me. And I just leaned in and said, thank you. I didn't know what to say to her, but it's one of those moments where the parents like to say, this will hurt me more than it hurts you. And she got me. And I think that's the only time no, it wasn't. There was another time I actually broke a salad bowl. So yeah, that's where the stress relief comes through. And then I made a joke about it because my brother happened to walk in just when everything was scattering around the kitchen floor. And I turned to my mother. I said, did you see what David did? He had no idea what he was walking into, but she knew later on when I was repairing something. I said, you remember what happened here? She goes, I have no idea. So I took that as forgiveness. But it's tough. The pros say you must take breaks. And part of that, I think, stems from on the airplane, they say if there's an issue, put your oxygen mask on first and then attend to your child or your loved one. And that's true, because if you're not in good condition, you can't help them as best as you should be able to. So you have to keep in good shape. You have to eat well and do what you can. While I was there, I wanted to return dignity to her, but also to her surroundings. So first I bought her a new wardrobe. If you want to cheer up anybody at any age, a new wardrobe will do it. And that certainly helped. But then I started renovating our house since my mom slept a lot during the day like a baby. I had time to do things. So I bought a baby monitor so I could watch her wherever I was in the house. And I renovated the entire house during my time there as well. And the first part I did was the basement. So I actually put in like a man cave, a gym for stress relief, because I knew I needed that because of the pros and because it creeps up on you. And there were, I think, a couple of those emotional outbursts from me came from just the stress, and it builds up. And when my little sister and I were taking care of my mother when this whole thing started with hospice, we knew hospice was there. So we took breaks, took walks around our town and stuff like that. But when I took it on, I said, I'm a guy, I can handle this. No big deal. And then boom, once in a while, something would happen. But then I actually had a medical issue where my mother almost outlived me, which was not cool. So I had to go in for an emergency surgery, and I had an infection in my body. And they said, if you were like a day or two later, you would have been a goner because it would have gotten into the blood system. And so that was not cool. So I went through an emergency surgery. Then a couple of weeks later, something went wrong. They had to do another surgery. And then 8 months later, another surgery. And so they couldn't pinpoint what caused that. It was diverticulitis, but I had a puncture, and that's what got infected. And so not pretty, but they said that could be related to stress. Yeah, that was not a good thing to go through. But you learn from that. And hopefully I have a chapter about that in the book, and hopefully some people will benefit from my near disaster. But yeah, take the breaks and balance it as best you can. The humor really helps because she was funny. One night I got her just about ready for bed. And so she get a sponge bath in the morning and at night. And I'm just finished up with the baby lotion and things like that. And then I'm just about to secure her diaper, and she starts peeing on me. And it's cute when a newborn pees on a new parent, not when it's your 90-year-old mother. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? I just about finished. And she says, it's natural, and smiles. And I'm like, how can I be mad? It is natural. She couldn't hold the darn thing at this point. So I just started all over again and rolled with it. So if you can laugh at the situation or embrace the horror of it, really, it helps so much.
Just a second. Okay. I'll get with him afterwards. It's not an emergency. I just need to make sure. So, what about support? So, I know that I had no support. The people around me were like, it's your mom, just do it. And I did not do it to the end of her life. I did it for a couple years, and then I moved away because I was having problems. And no, I cannot live, would not live with my mom anymore. It was just too much. So she ended up going somewhere else, and she lived for 5 more years. So she was fine. Died unexpectedly, but it was whatever. But I know that I didn't have support, and that made it 100 times worse.
Yeah.
So like I said, when she went to my sisters and didn't even ask them if they would do what I was doing for her, because she had pressured me into doing it for her.
Yeah.
Then I knew, that's why the light bulb went off. Then I knew, hey, wait, she really just doesn't need this. She's doing this because you'll do it. You've let her push you into it.
Yeah.
And so that can be a bad thing. What kind of support did you have when you were doing that with your mom?
I had 5 siblings. 2 live locally. My older brother was like the point man. So he was the one who hired the people who were in the house and handled the medications and the family finances and stuff like that. So when I moved in to take over, I wanted to relieve a lot of that pressure from him. So he got a nice vacation, but he would come on every Tuesday and cook dinner and get mom ready for bed at night. So he kept in practice. So that was lovely because when I had to go through my emergency, he filled in until we found someone else who could. My brother, who lived about a mile away, was not comfortable doing any hands-on, which is fine. You got to do what you really feel you can handle. But he helped with the chores, snow plowed in the winter, and help with the garden and stuff like that in the summer, and would certainly come in and stay with my mother and keep her company, but none of the caregiving stuff. My younger sister, when she had 5 kids of her own, but whenever she came in from Michigan, she jumped right in and helped out, which was lovely. I had to go to every few months out to LA to handle the business. And when I did that, I had a sister who also lived in California. So she would swap out with me. But she had a limit. She said she had a 7-day limit with her mother, and because she was the number one child. And I think that my sisters admitted that my mother was a lot tougher on the girls. So she had 3 girls and 3 guys. And I was the youngest guy. So I probably got away with murder compared to the other 2. And so I was very fortunate. And then my other sister lived at the Jersey Shore, and she was also hands off, but she would cook and bring soups up. And she was like a little Martha Stewart. She would make blankets with pockets and a nice little, and bring mom toys and stuff like that. So she knew how to keep mom happy and stuff with those kinds of things. So I was very fortunate in that. And as I'm finding out too, we had my parents had great neighbors. I just did yesterday or the day before, I did a virtual author visit at the public library of my hometown in New Jersey. And there were a bunch of people that Zoomed in. I think we had about 30 people there. And I couldn't tell everybody who was on, but I received an email from our next door neighbor the next day. And she said, I couldn't speak and I didn't want you to see me because I was crying the whole time because I loved your parents so much. And I was so emotional about your stories and stuff like that. And it was just lovely because my parents were good people and they seemed to attract good people. And so that helped. And I think that the way they raised us, they didn't lecture a lot, but I think they probably they led by example. We watched them do the right thing and do good things for other people and be good to each other. And all my siblings are kind of like that too. So this was second nature to us. And I'm sorry you didn't have the support because it made a huge difference.
Yeah. Of course, that's the same across the board. If you have a good support group, no matter what you're going through, you're going to be able to get through it with a lot more grace than if you don't.
And if you keep it to yourself, and that's what the problems happen, just getting it out. Or even, when I let out, my mother never swore, and I didn't pick up that trait. And I knew if I swore, she was going to be upset. So one night, I guess I got frustrated. I said, listen, I'm sorry, but this parenting thing is tough. And she said, but I never swore. And this is someone who raised 6. And I'm like, oh my God, there goes the guilt again.
You guys did do the available resources, right? Like respite care and other things when it was time to, right?
Not really. I took over everything. So we did have only near the very end did we call hospice when I knew she was shutting down. And because of my medical issues, I couldn't do the physical. Before that, I was carrying her everywhere. And then we did road trips and things like that. I wanted to keep her active. But a caregiver that we found, Marina, was lovely. And so she was very experienced. And my mother, it took about 5 days for her. She didn't want to be on earth very long, but she took her time in dying. So there was like a 5-day vigil where I was with her almost the entire time, just exhausted. And Marina came in and inspected my mother and said, yes, she's going. So she knew. And so I knew that was it. And we didn't call hospice, I think, until the very end because she was well cared for. She was fine. And with my dad, the same thing. He was at home and I only had 8 days with him, but I was there a lot of those 8 days. And we didn't call hospice till 2 days before he passed because he was well cared for. And when they came in to check, they said, yeah, he's well cared for, but he's gravely ill. We said, we know. That's why we called you. And they're like, but he's gravely ill. And we said, yes, we know. That's why we called you. We've been taking care of him. He's very happy, but he's ready. And they dropped off the emergency kit. So I had to give her the morphine if she needed it. And it was funny because I asked hospice, I said, look, we're running. My mother didn't have a lot of pain, but we did do the morphine the last few days. And so I joked with the hospice and said, we're running out of the morphine. You have any for the caregiver? And you know what to do. I said, bring over extra because it tasted terrible, but it worked for my mom. So I mean, we had them come in and give us the instructions for that because as you're going through, I don't know if you've been through that. So there's all these stages of death and you have the gurgling and then you have the fish out of water, and that's when you know the stages of actual death are happening. And I had to be aware of what to do when those steps happen. The gurgling is bad. And even I said, we've got to stop. This is not comfortable for her. And the hospice nurse that was looking, she says, it's more uncomfortable for you than it is for her. I said, that's not acceptable. We've got to stop this gurgling. And so they tried some things, and then finally they sent over some medication that seemed to work. But yeah, you don't want to see your loved one suffering in any way. And so when you hear those sounds, and because the body doesn't want to die, the body tries to fight it into the end for the most part. And so there's some little strange things that happen as they transition. Yeah.
I did not have to go through that. I was not living in the same state as my mom when she died, and she didn't get any of that because, okay, so the reason why I did care for my mom is she had a brain tumor. And at the time that I was doing stuff for her, it was growing, but they ended up doing like something, radiation or whatever, to try to shrink it a little bit because it was in a place that it couldn't be operated on. And then, like I said, about 5 years later, she was living with two of my sisters in Maryland and just didn't wake up one morning. So
Yeah.
there was no signs that she was going to. It was just she didn't wake up one morning.
Yeah. It's sad, but that might be the better way to go. My dad had heart disease, so that's a horrible, it may be different now, but this was like over 25 years ago. It was like a 7-year death sentence. And he just got worse and worse. And he was a very strict Catholic. And during those last 8 days, he said, I used to feel sorry for people who died in plane crashes or in a car wreck. He said, boy, I think that's the way to go. Go fast. Because he goes, this is horrible. And it was horrible to witness that. And it's a shame. Yeah. Life can be cruel at some points. Yeah.
Do you have anything else that I missed that you wanted to talk about?
I'll tell you one interesting thing with this book. Besides, I originally wanted to write it to record family history because I was privy to a lot of really fun moments and some really interesting conversations that I didn't want the other family members to miss. So I just started writing all that kind of stuff down. When I wrote the book in this room. This is like my office. I needed some emotional space. I couldn't write it right away, but I had notes, and whenever I was inspired, I jotted down things, and I took a lot of photographs and a lot of videos and things like that. And so when I got here and I had time to really reflect, I started writing. And so if you read the story, and there's a lot of funny stuff in the book. I don't call it a how-to book. I call it what I did book. And if you get some benefit, great. If nothing else, you're going to be entertained because we had a lot of fun. She was a funny lady, and my writing's kind of very conversationally fun. But if you look at the story, I think originally or read it, it seems like I went and rescued my mother. And in a sense, I did. I didn't think of it as a big deal. I just thought it was the right thing to do. But so the book was released on Mother's Day in 2023. And I wanted to do the audio book, but emotionally couldn't do it for a long time. So I had to draw on all my acting training and skills. And about 6 months later, I built a studio here and did the audiobook. Between the 6 months, I had time to reflect and look at the book because now I'm looking at the book in a whole new lens to do it vocally. And I made some changes and things like that and updates. But upon the reflection, I think my mother rescued me. And that was the new perspective because at that point, I did some pretty good things in life, but nothing that was really that meaningful. I did some acting and I did some design. I did some good things, but this was the best thing I did. And my mother gave me that opportunity, whether she meant to or not, she gave me that opportunity. And luckily I took it. And it was, as an actor, it was the best role I ever played. And no matter how difficult it was, I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world. And yeah, so that was a very interesting thing to look at it after some time to reflect on it. And I certainly thank my mother for that. And I thank her and my dad for the upbringing because that all played a big part in this thing.
Okay. Thank you for coming on my podcast. It's been wonderful. I think you're the most famous person I've had on my podcast.
Well, okay, let's not go that far. If you're bringing, oh my God, I haven't worked in whatever. Oh, I don't even remember the last one. Probably 2012, I think was the last role. I did save a girl from a murder conviction. So what was I? Saved at 17, something like that. A 17-year-old girl was framed by one of those nasty girls in high school, and I got her off. So that was my last job as an attorney. I saved a girl from wrongful conviction. It's fantastic. Anyway, so I thank you. It's always fun to share these stories. I think people would get a kick out of the book, and it keeps my mom in the present. And for me, that's a gift. So I thank you for that.